Well, good morning, folks. I'm Tom Carrico. I'm a senior fellow in the International Security Program at CSIS. We are live for our Counter UAS event. We want to give folks just a few moments to log on. I'll just pause and then we'll get started here in just a minute. All right. Well, hello and welcome, everyone. I'm Tom Carrico. I'm a senior fellow with CSIS and the moderator for today. We're very excited to serve as the forum for the release of the Defense Department's new report describing its strategy for countering small unmanned aerial systems. At one time, the missile defense conversation was focused on ballistic missile threats, and to be sure, ballistic missiles remain a profound piece of the problem. Yesterday, for instance, was the one-year anniversary of Iran's missile attack on U.S. forces at the Al-Assad Air Base in Iraq. But while that threat is still there and increasing, it's definitely not just about rogue state ballistic missiles anymore. So we here at the CSIS Missile Defense Project focus really on the challenges across the spectrum of air and missile threats, essentially everything that arrives in or through the atmosphere that flies somewhere between mud and space. Now, at the outset, we want to briefly acknowledge that this has been a challenging week for the country, meaning, of course, the events at the Capitol on Wednesday. But the work of the Department of Defense and its professionals must go on. And we have two of those professionals with us this morning, the report's lead authors, Major General Sean Gainey and Ms. Nicole Thomas. First up, who I feel like I've been on a half dozen panels with you, sir. Major General Gainey is director of the Joint Counter Small UAS Office and the Director of Fires G357. Prior to that, he served as Deputy Director for Force Protection, J8 Joint Staff. Part of that was being the head of the Joint Integrated Air and Missile Defense Organization, or JIAMDO, which is especially important for our topic today, how C-UAS fits together with everything else. He's also served as the commander of the 108th Air Defense Artillery Brigade from the 94th Army Air, and a number of other air defense roles. So great to see you, sir. You're a repeat offender at CSIS. Welcome back. Our second speaker will be Ms. Nicole Thomas, Division Chief for Strategy and Policy in the Joint Counter Small UAS Office, or JCO. She really led the team that wrote the report we're talking about this morning. As a senior civilian with the Army, Ms. Thomas has previously served as senior strategist to the Army staff, director of the U.S. Army Pacific Command Washington office, and has been detailed to the House Appropriations Committee's Surveys and Investigations Division. We're going to start with some short opening remarks from our speakers, move to a conversation about the report, and then we'll be running through audience questions. And for those tuning in, and from the looks of it, we have a healthy audience this morning, I would encourage you to please submit those questions. You can do so through the CSIS event page by clicking on the button that says Ask Live Questions. We'd ask that you please be sure to include your name and affiliation so our speakers in the audience know who you are and where you're coming from. I've got a long list of questions, but we want to make sure and hear what is on your mind as well. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, General Gainey, to get us started. Welcome.
Thanks, Tom, for this event today and really giving us this platform to relay what we've done with the DoD strategy. And for all, also like to thank for all you listening in and joining us today to really listen on this important topic. The Secretary of Defense designated the Army as the executive agent for counter small unmanned aircraft systems, which we'll commonly refer to as counter small UAS, that included Group 1, 2, and 3 unmanned aircraft. Now, when he designated us as the executive agent, he added into Group 3 because prior to that, we were only focused in the department on Groups 1 and 2, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But with the authority to lead and direct the efforts of developing a joint material solution, joint training doctrine, and this was done because the Secretary understood the importance of the threat and felt we needed an enterprise approach to get after this problem set. The Secretary of the Army then stood up the Joint Counter UAS Office, you'll also hear referred to as the JCO, and I was designated as the director to develop integrated plans, technology, training concepts, and doctrine, and to focus appropriate resources on countering the UAS threat while minimizing unnecessary duplication and redundancy. It's important to note that the Secretary also assigned the Army's Rapid Capabilities and Critical Technology Organization, you'll commonly hear it referred to as RCTO, under Lieutenant General Thurgood, as the material and acquisition lead in support of my organization. So since we were designated in the February timeframe, some of the main efforts we had moved on besides the strategies. In June, the DoD leadership approved the results of an operational assessment of counter-UAS capabilities currently in the field and selected 10 initial joint counter-UAS systems for continued investment. To build on these capabilities with emerging technologies, the JCO and RCTO held an industry open house in October 2020. At this event, we described the path for industry to bring new capability to meet our requirements. And speaking of requirements, the Joint Counter-UAS operational requirements coordinated with all service combatant commanders and DoD stakeholders provides the parameters that address current and future capabilities required in every phase of the kill chain within a modular open system command and control architecture. The DoD counter-UAS strategy provides the framework for addressing small UAS across the spectrum, and you'll hear us refer to the terms of hazards and threats in the homeland, host nation, and contingency locations. These guiding documents serve as the basis for providing a path ahead for industry demonstrations, experimentation, and innovation opportunities. The department will continue to work with industry to bring interim systems to full maturity and to eventually replace them with follow-on enduring solutions. So Tom, that's all I have for opening comments. I'll pass it back to you.
All right, thank you, sir. Now over to you, Nicole.
Thank you for giving us the opportunity to share the strategy with CSIS went through to develop it. So this is the first DoD strategy for counter small UAS. The services and combatant commands develop their own regional or service-specific document, but this one looks at the challenge across the department. One of the first and most important things that we did is to ensure that all the stakeholders were part of developing the strategy. And together we spent a considerable amount of time making sure that we accurately captured the problem so that we could develop a relevant and executable framework for the strategy. We used 3 documents to provide kind of the left and right limits of the document. And the first one was the NDS, or the National Defense Strategy. The second one was the DoD directive that established the executive agency. And the third one was the threat assessment. In terms of process, the team spent time thinking about the current state of affairs. How will we describe where the department is for counter small UAS? We then identified what the desired end state would mean. What does success look like? And it was that space between where we were and where we wanted to be that we called, what was getting in the way. And that's where we spent the bulk of our time, and we turned those items in the what is getting in the way into actions that would move us from where we were to where we wanted to be. So we identified probably several dozen things that were getting in the way, and they fell into 3 categories that became our lines of effort. So the first line of effort is called Ready the Force, and it addresses our concerns about our ability to keep pace with this rapidly evolving challenge. So one of the actions that we're taking to address the challenge is to leverage existing S&T work that's been done by research facilities and academia and industry so that we can more rapidly develop and deploy innovative solutions. The second line of effort is called Defend the Force. And this line of effort is dedicated to the development and refinement of common non-material solutions such as joint doctrine, training, and concepts. And finally, the team discussed how the joint force could maximize its counter small UAS effectiveness in the homeland and host nations. So to do that, we needed to improve our interoperability with both our international partners and federal agencies. So we developed a line of effort called Build the Team, and that prioritizes interoperability and information sharing among our critical partners. So through the implementation of this strategy, the department will be positioned to address the small UAS challenge we encounter across all three operating environments. That's homeland, host nation, and contingency locations. So the department is taking a holistic approach to the problem so we can provide commanders with forces to protect DoD personnel, assets, facilities, and missions from current and future small UAS threats. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you both. We'll go ahead and just dive right in. I think maybe just to set the table a little bit here, I wonder if you might speak to why it was necessary, why it was important for this office, for this strategy to be set up and done, in the sense that, as you alluded to, General Gainey, there have been a number of service programs. Why was it important for this to be a joint and a defense-wide effort? Why was it set up in this way?
Yeah, and Tom, that's a great question, because we get that question asked a lot, because as everybody understands that the services have been working on this problem set really since about 2016, and we're producing a lot of capability against this threat set. However, we were spending a lot of money in the department, a couple $2 billion worth, developing equipment with urgent requirements. So essentially, services were getting capability out to warfighter quickly, rightfully so, because we want to get capability where the combat commander sees a gap and get it to them quickly. However, we never followed that up with maturation of the systems that went out initially. So you essentially ended up with a situation where you had every service working on a problem set, several redundant systems out there, all with the commander. Not all of it worked as advertised to the commander. So the secretary felt we needed an enterprise approach to get after the combatant commander's requirements and essentially be able to deliver it from a joint perspective and reduce the redundancy that was out there at the time.
Great, thank you. Let me now just sort of start in some respects at the beginning with the threat, or put differently, the utility of small UASs, both ours and our adversaries. The document suggests that the proliferation, the exponential growth of these systems is going to change the character of warfare. It also has this interesting observation about these things existing in the gap between air defense, force protection, and airspace control. So if you could just sort of, one of you, unpack that for us a little bit. How is it that this is kind of coming at us at the gaps and seams? Why is this so important? Maybe Nicole, would you like to hop in there?
I can start off a little bit. I'll start off. So the changing character of warfare. So with the increased capability of these systems and the decreasing price points and the accessibility is led to this exponential growth. And so that's kind of lowered the barrier to entry and expanded the number of actors who can, enter into the conflict. So that's why we're sort of seeing this kind of changing character of war. So, for instance, recently Turkey referred to as UAS, and you can see that in John, who's entering the fray.
Great.
Hey, Tom, I'd like to offer another piece to that, and really picks up on why the Army was selected and was found to be the best fit for this when we looked at it. So at the time, the Army was really focused on the groups 4 and above, the larger UAS, with our current systems being developed in the integrated air and missile defense. The focus on 1 and 2 was seen as more of a force protection problem by the services. So you had different efforts moving out, and it wasn't a synchronized effort of, Army Air Defense Force, Fire Center of Excellence, focus on, so I'm speaking from an Army perspective right now, but if you can imagine this across the Joint Force and other services having these same problems. So essentially you created this seam where through the operational urgent requirements, you had the acquisition community just rapidly developing stuff, but with no .mil PF framework around that, like in the groups 4 and above with the integrated air and missile defense portion. So by selecting the Army as the executive agent, you now took the Army that's already, as you look at some of our roles and responsibilities at air-based defense and protection of the joint force, you now give us that groups 1 through 2, and you add 3 because the integrated air and missile defense was, with some of our Patriot systems, could engage some of the 3. It's not cost effective, but you could engage some of the 3. So you put that under the Army, and in my role specifically, if you look, that's why my title is not only Joint Counter-UAS Office, but also Director of Fires. So you put it all under one Army general officer, under one service, to really start to close those seams and look at this holistic problem as opposed to isolated problem.
Great, thank you. That's important. Let me just sort of follow that up with a little bit of the missions that are presumably going to be attached to these systems. The document talks about it being useful not just for direct attack or ISR, but really talks a little bit about novel applications as well. Thinking of them as platforms for EW, cyber attack, AI, facial recognition, and all that sort of thing. So having described kind of the fact that this has arrived, where do you see this going? How do you think over the next 5-10 years the threat of the small UAS problem is going to affect how we think about air power and kind of that seam between what we call today UASs and frankly cruise missiles and fixed wing aircraft? Where do you see this going?
Okay, I'll jump on that one because we look at this extensively. So you can look at this a couple of ways. Look at us as the U.S. and how we're looking to leverage and are leveraging this capabilities in the areas of unmanned, whether it's unmanned teaming or just unmanned systems out there. There's exponential growth. And if you look at the threat we're looking at now and the systems we developed now in the areas we're focused in on is, really looking at the UASs that have a controlled operator and finding ways to cut that link between the operators. Well, where we see the threat going in the future is autonomous, and you highlighted some of that, massing, swarming capability, and integrating AI and potentially leveraging 5G out in the future. These are some of the challenge areas that we're looking at as we look at our requirements for developing future capabilities. These are the areas we're looking to address to be able to have capability as that technology comes on board and becomes more prevalent.
Great, thank you. So let me now turn to the threshold of the counter UAS mission. You've painted a picture here of a pretty robust threat. And so the question becomes, okay, what are we trying to accomplish with the counter mission? How much counter capability is going to be enough? At one point, the document talks about layered defenses. So, when we envision counter UAS, how thick of a defense do we need? How robust? And put differently, is this something that we're going to be able to keep up with on the counter side, or is it, seemingly just too much of a challenge? Your thoughts there on scoping the mission?
Yeah, and another great point, and I'm glad you brought up, Tom. With my background in air and missile defense, I'm able to use a lot of similarities when assigned this role, because if you look at the integrated air and missile defense and the capability we have out there, we'll never have enough to meet the demand that's out there, because you can only create so much, and as you look at the entire department budget, you have other priorities that you have to look after too. So you have to maximize the capabilities you have, in the way, even when I was in the Joint Integrated Air and Missile Defense Office, was you got to synergize your efforts amongst the services and leverage the interoperability of all your systems to be able to bring that capability to bear. When looking at the counter UAS problem set, the challenge is several threats down to several different spaces to where you look at the capacity piece. But I would say the integration in that aspect also of taking our current systems that we have that have capability against the stress and ensure they're integrated into the systems that we're bringing on board. And really our methodology in this is with the common C2 aspect of it that we did up front, taking my lessons learned from in the Joint Integrated Air and Missile Defense. What you want to start with first is have a common interoperability with the services. Don't do that on the back end, do that on the front end. So you start with there. So as we did this, we started with FAD-C2 and had directed the other services. If they have a system, if they're not going to use FAD-C2, it has to be interoperable with FAD-C2 so we can leverage the same common C2 and then integrate the command and control system through an open architecture to where we then integrate systems components into that. So you have a changing, improving, componentized architecture to keep up with technology. Now, the capacity piece is always going to be the challenge. So therefore, you have to leverage the other aspects, the passive defense aspect of it, and then leverage the other systems that you have and that we can utilize to get after this problem set. So we're trying not to look at it as just one silver bullet, but can you leverage the current technology moving after, and can you leverage the systems that you have now? For example, some of the gun systems, can you use technology with some of the ammunition to better get after the counter UAS? So every operator has the ability to engage a UAS as opposed to just a specific MOS with a capability to get after everybody on the battlefield. It's got all arms against counter UAS moving forward.
Well, you jumped ahead to the C2 thing, and you mentioned FAD C2 in particular. So I better do a two-finger just to clarify. Is FAD C2 going to be the basis for the joint counter UAS?
It was the decision, like I said, and that's some of the goodness of having an air defender with the background of working in this area and working with the services from JIAMDO, looking at this problem set. So we laid out and we looked at from a perspective of what we have right now, what's the best C2 system we have right now. And FAD C2 was that system. We can get the kinetic fire control off of that system. However, we understand that there are other systems out there that the services are using that show promise. For example, the Medusa system for the Air Force. So we've worked with the Air Force, put funding for the integration of that system with FAD C2, so it's interoperable. And the same with the Marine Corps as they move forward with their ADSI program. But eventually where we want to get to, so we use FAD C2 as the basis. However, where we want to get to is really an open architecture standards-based C2 system. So where you're just plugging in based off of the standards as opposed to the box in itself. But right now it's FAD C2.
Great, thank you. Let me just follow up. You mentioned the passive defense side of this as well, and I'm going to tie this in with a question that was submitted by Sidney Friedberg from Breaking Defense. He asked, "Look, it's one thing to talk about the rogue states, but what about Russia and China?" Let me add on to that question. Look, how are we going to be able to wrestle this mission to the ground? It used to be said that the bomb in the 1950s, the bomber would always get through, and then it was the ICBM that would always get through. Given where the threat's going, is the counter mission something that we can do you think, or is it something that's going to become so robust that we're not going to be able to keep up? So just to be a little provocative there and tie it to the passive defense thing as well.
Yeah, no, fully agree and understand the question. It's a very good question, and so I would tell you we're doing the mission now, again, with the great work of the services in the systems that are being loosened out. We are being successful out there right now, and we're having engagements that we're tracking out there right now. However, just in the integrated air and missile defense area, I would never sit here and advocate that we would have a seamless, impenetrable architecture where nothing would get through. You're always going to have that potential for something to get through. So, and that's why I highlighted the passive measures. still the same as you would in any missile defense or air and missile defense area. Same with counter UAS. There's several studies out there that we've looked at and several conflict lessons learned that simple use of netting, camouflage, hardening, and dispersion can minimize the effects of whether it's an ISR platform or if it's a one-way bombing platform. You can still gain benefits from that.
Great, great. Well, you just mentioned the systems, so I think probably this is a good point to move to the acquisition, first the acquisition and the programs side. And I might throw this to you, Nicole. The document talks about leveraging a risk-based assessment process. So you alluded to that in your remarks, I think, and talked about how that will help us make better informed decisions, especially about budgets and resource allocation. So I guess I'm wondering, okay, going forward, who's the us here? Who's going to be managing that process, doing the assessments, and then I guess telling the services how to translate that to material and programmatic decisions?
Right. Thank you. So the us is, us as a department that we need to take a risk-based approach. We can't put every defensive measure at, every DoD location. So we have to look at the different locations to see what is the risk, what is the vulnerability, and to then get the appropriate countermeasures for that particular location. So we have, I think, DDS performs those assessments and provides that information back to the installation about what they could potentially use to help them with their threats or vulnerabilities.
Great, great. Let me go to something that I think you put right on the cover of the document, or right at the front. It was this quote from the National Defense Strategy about how DoD management structure and processes are not written in stone. And your document emphasizes that, look, if these processes are not well enough suited to the end, then they need to be changed. I guess I was curious why you chose to highlight that with respect to this particular mission. Do you see the need for change in terms of the acquisition management and processes here?
Well, with the rapidly evolving threat, we need to be more agile. Some of the acquisition processes that are better suited for longer lead times won't work in this type of an environment. So we just, as a department, need to be flexible so that we can continue to get after the threat, to keep pace or to stay ahead of it. So it's not just applicable to counter UAS, it's applicable to anything else where the technology is evolving.
And Tom, I'd like to jump on that one also. And I think it was also highlighting what's already being put in place. And one of the things from my J8 background and being very familiar and working intimately with this area, Honorable Lord, and now the General Hyten, the Vice Chairman, fully recognize the ability to move fast. So some of the things that are already put in place, like the middle tier acquisition for the service to rapidly develop prototypes and get capability out there, are in place for the department to leverage to give us that ability to move fast. And one of the things we know in this mission set, like Nicole highlighted, is we have to be able to keep pace with an ever-changing threat. And to do that, we have to leverage things like rapid prototyping, middle tier acquisition, to be able to bring these components into our open architecture system as we're seeing changes on the battlefield out there moving forward. But also, to highlight that, it's also from a requirements perspective. And one of the things General Hyten is adamant about moving faster is also taking, not just focusing on service specific requirements, but taking overarching joint requirements and applying them across the services. So we start moving at this from a joint perspective. And I think that's, also adds to why the Army and the Joint Counter U.S. Office is looking at this from a joint perspective. And that's what we did. We've codified our requirements, took it to General Hyten in the JROC and got it approved from a joint perspective. So as we refer to capabilities, we're moving forward with it. We focus it from a joint perspective as opposed to a service perspective. Now, services still have service requirements, And as part of our construct, services will continue to move forward. The Navy is going to continue to move forward of integrating capability into their ships. We're not going to stop that or change that based off of our joint requirements. This just takes what's commonality amongst the services. For example, like a fixed site installation, all the services have that same challenges, so the requirements are relatively the same moving forward in that area.
Great. I want to come back to the Navy in just a few minutes here, but let's stay with the programs and the material side. This is very much a joint staff document. It really emphasizes that architecture-wide approach. It really emphasizes the .mil-PF and how the material needs to be aligned with the rest of the .lpf. So in some respects, it reads as a lot about the ends and the ways, but there's not a whole lot of discussion of the programs themselves. In fact, I don't think any programs are mentioned. There's some pictures in there, but there's not a discussion of the program. So I think, General Gainey, you mentioned 10 or so programs earlier on. What's going on in this space? Who's doing what programs are there? And then we can kind of go from there. Either of you want to jump on that?
Yeah, and we specifically didn't focus on programs up front, but more focused on the broadness of piece. And that's where Nicole came in. She brought me up in the broadness piece because I was always, hey, I'm a warfighter. I was like, hey, let's get in this. She was, hey, sir, remember, this is enterprise approach. Let's keep this broad and let's keep this overarching, but highlight how we're moving forward to allow the development of that capability. And so what we started out with is, as I highlighted earlier, there were a lot of systems out there, and still are. And as we work to narrow that down and invest RTD and funding. So what we did up front is we took an assessment. We worked with DOT&E here in OSD in the Joint Department Analysis team, JDAT team, and sent them out to the AOR and also some locations in CONUS and said, hey, do an assessment of the systems out there. Now, they weren't able to get to every system that was out there, but they were able to get to the majority of the systems and provide us assessment and feedback of what they felt was working best. And what they came back and essentially laid out for us was, hey, a system of systems, layered architecture, where essentially you integrate the EW capability, if that's what you have, the radar effector, and whatever effector you have into a common C2 is the best way to get after this problem set. And essentially we knew that we had to narrow this down because we had to, and also what they found out was that what we all knew is that the soldiers were trying, from a .mil-PF perspective, trying to on the ground train and on several systems as opposed to focusing on a few systems that we can incorporate into training for them. So essentially, based off of the information that we had, the best information we had, we narrowed it down to 10 interim systems. And we, from a fixed site perspective, we did that with a system of systems approach. For example, the fixed site lids system from the Army has those systems of systems, the radar capability, EW capability, and a kinetic capability, kinetic drone on drone type of capability with the radar. And then we also brought in the Air Force's Ninja system, which is a EW type capability, and same with the Navy's Corian type system. And we also looked at the Marines doing a lot of great work on their MADIS system. We took the interim system that was on the cover that showed success out there, but that's not the system that's going to be enduring. That's just right now. But they're evolving that system to a increment one system, and the Army's doing some stuff with some of their mobile systems. And then we looked at handheld systems. We work with SOCOM. And, they have some dismounted systems and some systems that they use that can attach to their individual weapon. And this kind of gave us our framework of interim systems. And essentially what we did was we said, okay, services, we're going to assign you responsibility for that system that we've selected. And you're going to put RTD into that money. And you're going to mature that system to meet the current joint requirements that we have. simultaneously, we're going to look at what's the future capability, what's out there next, the high energy laser, the low collateral effector, and we've assigned some of those areas to a service. For example, the Air Force has the low collateral effector, so they will go to our test range with RICTO in April, issue an announcement to industry and say, hey, in April, we're going to look at all the low collateral interceptors, bring that capability to our common test range in Yuma, and we will down select to that. And then we will open up a contract for all the services to then buy it. And that gets after that open architecture concept. So then next capability, whether it's high energy laser or whatever, same type of concept moves forward. And then so that creates a on-ramp, off-ramp path. The current systems, if they can't keep up with the requirements, and we meet a point where they no longer are able, we off-ramp that component capability, and then we on-ramp what's next based off of how we're delegating assignment to the services and how they're bringing that with RICTO to our standard range where those systems are evaluated, and then a path for on-ramp. And that's how we're moving forward from the material perspective in a broad sort of a view moving forward. And I can delve deep into more individual questions if we need more details.
Great. I mean, I guess the one thing that comes to mind there is, it's great to be able to tell the services what they ought to do, but the question is whether the teeth is going to be there in terms of the budget authority. That's the perennial issue with other air defense programs and integration as well.
Well, what's different about this, Tom? What's different about this is that we've already worked the approval through our construct where the JCO has a RTD&E line where the services put all that money into one line moving forward across the FIDEP. So we have a known, predictable funding line for new capability in our enabling efforts. And our enabling efforts are things like our common ranges to be able to do studies and evaluation, and also more importantly, fund our common threat library, where I2WD is essentially for all the services. Because before that, we were looking at different ones, and now we've consolidated under one organization moving forward. But with this common RTD&E line, we're now able to, like I highlighted, select a service to do a capability area and then give them the funding to move forward with that. So that's how we're able to do this, and we're looking to demonstrate success in April with the Air Force as the lead for the low collateral interceptor, and that's in the April timeframe with the RICTO common range at Yuma.
Great. One more quick thing. I'd be amiss if I didn't ask the laser question. Most of the pictures in the document appear to be, not all, but most appear to be a form of directed energy of one kind or another. What do you kind of see as the relative role of DE for the class 1 to 3 threat? And again, considering it's could be very numerous and capacity is going to be a question. How much of this is going to be DE, but you also mentioned gun solutions as well. Nicole, if you want to maybe take a stab at that?
Yeah, so I guess that was not intentional to have those similar pictures, but so we're agnostic to the actual specific effector. We're really more focused on the capability requirements to meet the threat.
Great. All right. Let me, in that case, circle back to really what I think you were speaking to, John Gainey, a minute ago, and that's kind of the relation between the Joint Office and the Army as the executive agent and the other services. We had a reporter from Inside Defense put in a question about the Aidan Quigley from Inside Defense asking what the Navy's role is going to be in your office, and if the Marines are involved. I might broaden that a little bit to say, okay, how is this going to work in terms of the division of labor between the Army and everybody else? Take a stab at that.
Yeah, and it's how it's working now. Because one thing we did, Tom, as we stood this up 10 months ago, we essentially didn't waste much time. The services have been very supportive of this effort, service chiefs on down. And immediately, every service sent a liaison officer that plugged into our organization, highly capable, highly respected individual. So the Navy, Marine, and Air Force, and now the Air Force is, Space Force is also plugging in to this effort. So they've been with us every step of the way in the development of our, down select all the way through moving forward, hip to hip with us. And essentially, we're trying to take a smart approach to this. We're not trying to redo everything. So, RICTO is our material arm to this from an executive agent, but we're not building a JPEO. That was understood up front. We were going to leverage the work that the services, because the services were doing great work. There was just a lot of redundancy that the secretary wanted us to eliminate and harness the efforts that they're already doing. So, so for example, the Air Force is doing a lot of great work on high energy lasers. We have them out there right now, combat testing. High powered microwave. Everybody's probably pretty familiar with the Thor system that they're working on right now. We're going to get that out there in a location. The Marines, the work that they're doing with their Mattis system and their mobile system, and the Army, the work we're doing with our C2 systems, even our mobile systems and our fixed site lids system of systems. And then the Navy, again, doing work with not only the core and fixed site lid system, but as you can see in the strategy with some of the pictures, the Navy has been, working on lasers, high energy lasers, and also a high powered microwave. So we're harnessing that work. And so what we've done, so as I've highlighted some of the work of those services, we essentially designate a joint lead for the DoD essentially. So right now, for example, highlighted Air Force. You be the department's lead on high energy laser and high powered microwave. However, we're looking at future technology and future things that are out there. And Navy's doing a lot of great work with solid state high powered microwave. So we've tagged Navy to be the lead in that area. And so they'll develop and harness that and then essentially recommend whether we as a department need to continue moving forward with this technology or based on prototypes or the work that's being done, introduce it as, hey, this is the effort we believe we need to go forward with as a department. And then essentially, as they develop that through their program offices, the other services show up from a procurement perspective and then buy out of their service budget from a procurement piece. And so you essentially, what you do is you create a menu of options in a systems of systems layered approach to give you the ability to mix and match the best capabilities out there and maybe the cost effective best, and you're able to build your architecture with the great work that's being done by all the services, but just doing it from a joint perspective.
So just to draw that out ever so slightly more, that when you talk about the division of labor, particular services, high energy lasers, and yet you still have your roles and missions. You highlighted the Army for the joint lead on joint missions for air base protection, for instance. Doesn't that suggest that you're going to see a lot more of, let's just say, the Army buying a Navy developed system, and maybe vice versa, more of that than what we see today? Is that fair?
It could, and as we create the efficiency, so what we hope to do is to see less of Air Force building a counter-UAS laser, Army building a counter-UAS laser, Navy building a counter-UAS laser, when you can have sponsor one service to do it. Now, we're not saying all services are going to get out of that area, but at some point they coalesce and a decision is made that we want to move forward with this type of lasers, because as you know, fully understand it, the Army's working lasers also from a air and missile defense approach. We have, we're looking at development of prototypes with our, Stryker vehicles with high energy laser on there. So when you look at counter-UAS perspective, at some point, the Air Force as a lead for counter-UAS will make a designation for the entire joint forces, this is how we need to proceed forward with this one, or maybe it's two type systems. And we have and the goodness is we have a governance process that we're able to work decisions through up to the secretary and Honorable Lord. We're grateful to have her in her role as OSD A&S and the Vice Chief of Staff of the Army, General Martin, that essentially make decisions or make recommendations to the Secretary of Defense for final decisions. With all of the service is part of that program, and their voices are inputted and heard, and we bring in the COCOM. So it's once again an enterprise approach to deliver the best capability and the best decisions for the warfighter.
Great, great. Well, look, we could spend the rest of the remaining 25 minutes on the roles and missions alone, but let me move a little bit to a different topic, and this is partners and allies. This is one of the three things you really emphasized in the document. You talk about the United States being the partner of choice is one of our competitive advantages here. So I guess let me just push back on that. First of all, what do you envision in terms of interoperability concretely? What other kind of cooperation with allies and partners might be possible here? And then, given the proliferation of all this stuff, can we take for granted that the United States will be the partner of choice? We're going to have a lot of competition out there in terms of development and other things.
So I'll start off first. So we will be operating when we're forward stationed. We're operating in the vicinity of our partners and allies. So investing in our shared security is critical. So we need to be able to have systems that plug and play. We need to have that interoperability. Now, the partner of choice is not just specific to counter UAS. It's across the board. Yes, there will be competition, but when we are co-located with our partners and allies, we have to be able to have systems that talk to each other, that work together. And that's what we mean by that.
Great.
And Tom, I'll pick up a little bit and add a little bit more to that, because just piggybacking off of what Nicole stated in your point of the partner of choice, you're right. As this problem continues to grow, countries are looking for capability that's out there, and some countries are moving faster than others. And this is a space right now where there's a race between countries to try to develop something and put it out there. And the approach we're trying to take is not just throw equipment and gear out there. Like I highlighted, we're trying to put that .mil-PF framework, leveraging the Fire Center of Excellence for the training piece behind these systems that we're developing. That, from a joint perspective, the Fire Center, not just Army, but look at standing up a joint counter-UAS Center of Excellence as we move forward. Looking around the FY24 timeframe. So then, by doing that, by putting the whole .mil-PF framework around it, so then you're developing capability, training to go with that capability, to where when you're putting equipment out there, you're getting the best effects possible, because these systems that we're putting out there aren't rudimentary type systems. They're EW type system. We talk about high power microwave and high energy laser. There's this complex technology involved with this, so there's a training curve that's required for this and for the operators to understand. So as countries are developing this and throwing equipment out there, and maybe other countries are buying it, I'm not so sure they're getting the best capability, but also the best training package with that capability. So as we take these systems to programs of record and work with the OSD level partners that are already in this space, and then to work with our allies, I think it's a good space, because already, when you look at organizations like NATO, where the U.S. is incorporated, has already talked about developing a NATO type counter UAS system, and our team, Nicole and our team's already integrated into NATO and been briefing what we're doing, and we've already seen interest from other countries coming back to us. Hey, we'd like to hear more about this, what you're doing, to be able to open those doors to get after what Nicole highlighted.
Great. Well, let me go back to you, Nicole, in terms of the three lines of effort that you highlighted in the opening. Readiness being the first line. The document talks about synchronizing our science and technology investments, and it talks about developing a common information sharing architecture. So, in terms of the investments, how is that synchronization going to be done? Who's going to be making the decisions? And then, in terms of the common architecture, this actually connects with a question we got from Boswick Offord from the Naval Postgraduate School in terms of how do you get a common operational picture to support decision making? So I think both of those two things on the readiness side.
Okay. In terms of the common operating picture, we're participating in working groups with DHS and TSA on the on developing a common operating picture. But in terms of you said synchronization, all the services are investing in their S&T. And so what we're going to be doing is we are going to be consolidating their S&T portfolios and kind of creating a roadmap to see, get a bigger picture of where we are as a department so that we can then see where the gaps are in S&T, and then we can then prioritize and invest in some of those gaps.
And Tom, I'll pick up. Nicole highlighted the interagency aspect of common operations picture was very important and something I'm excited about that we can do in this space that's not seen done across some of the other areas, because everybody, Homeland's reaching out to us, Department of Energy reaching out to us. Everybody wants to be part of this, and everybody wants to work together in this, and so we have a unique opportunity from a perspective like the officer that probably asked that question from the Naval Postgraduate School is probably looking at it from a service-specific question, because this is a common challenge we have in integrated air and missile defense with Army, Navy, BMD type systems, and how do we share that picture to synergize our effects and maximize our effects. So what we did, I highlighted to you with the current systems of, backdoor patching those together right now and leveraging FADC2. But what we took a step further as part of our joint requirements that I highlighted that was proved through the JROC. We took the effort to write in where we want to go with common C2 standards, so we create that common operating picture for decisions moving forward. And this is an effort that the department's going holistically. So this, these standards were written to look forward to, that future joint architecture, a lot of discussion on JAD, C2, and those type of things. So how do we create something that's going to meet our future architecture, common operating picture? And that's what we focus. That's why we focus the standards-based piece to where essentially you get your systems built to that standard, then you're able to operate with that C2 architecture to be able to, where we all want to go as a department in the future is that, any sensor, any shooter out there has that common operating picture to be able to make rapid decisions based off of the threat that we're seeing.
Great, thank you both. Let me move to the second line of effort, that's defend the force. General Dick Formica, retired U.S. Army Space Missile Defense Command, he asks, how do you see offense-defense integration as a component of handling the counter small UAS threats? And of course, General Gainey, your dual hat position as Chief of Fires would presumably inform that. I want to connect that with the document's repetition in terms of combined arms. So offense-defense integration, what kind of arms do you see being combined here to handle the threat?
Yeah, great question by retired Lieutenant General Formica, sir. Thank you for that question. And he would beat me over the head if I wasn't addressing it. No, I think we're, once again, by having, my role from the Army perspective, and once again, and as we're going to be the Fire Center of Excellence for the Joint for us also. That's one of the critical aspects of it, just with the integrated air missile defense, the offensive and defensive fires. We fully embrace that pillar of attack operations when you look at integrated air missile defense, same to the counter U.S. problem set. And I would tell you, we're already doing it now. One of the advantages of right now where we're at is, as the threat utilizes the radio control with some of, you'll be able to develop that capability within your system. So we're definitely looking at how do we maximize the attack operations into our, because part of the problem, what I meant to highlight earlier when you asked the question, Tom, about things getting through, you probably can't get everything. You have to find that point where do you go after the point of origin of some of these threats. Now it's a little harder because it's spread out, but I think with some of the technology we're trying to move forward within our C2 systems to give us that ability to be able to track that information will provide us a capability even greater than what we're doing now, because that's a critical aspect of trying to be able to get after this threat set of so many, because it would be a whole lot easier to hit, somebody that's about to launch some swarms at us prior to them launching those swarms and then trying to get after that swarm aspect.
Great. Well, that actually connects to the last third line of effort about building the team. There's a whole lot going on there, but I was struck by the reference to developing these capabilities, not just to mitigate and defeat the threat, but you also talk about deterring it. And I guess as I think about this, look, they're plentiful, they're cheap. What do you have in mind there in terms of deterring the employment of small UASs in a conflict? Nicole, do you want to maybe take that?
So I'll take a stab at it. So obviously we prefer to win without fighting. So when our adversaries know we have capability in systems, that acts as a natural deterrent. General Gainey, do you want to talk about specific systems?
Yep. I'm going to take this from the homeland aspect of our challenge and the bases that we have out there right now that we're putting capability and looking at the some of the authorities that we have in the homeland and host nation and working with our FAA and host nation partners on freedom of navigation, where you may not use some of your high kinetic stuff. You may have to use other means, other capabilities, and other means. One of the areas that I'm excited about, which helps us get after this, is the FAA is now directing the use of remote ID for UASs out there. So allows us the ability to now, if we embed the technology into our systems, to be able to identify and work with law enforcement to be able to, if we identify somebody violates a restrictive airspace, or we see somebody from an ISR perspective continually loitering around an area, that we can work with law enforcement to then go to that individual. And things that are already happening right now with our interagency partners, Homeland Defense, is they do some of their work out there, having that ability. And that's some of the things that they're leveraging with our partners to be able to extend our arm from a, material/non-material ability, using other ways to get after, going after the point of origin, as opposed to shooting down these things. And so as you do that, and as hopefully you start compelling some of that activity as from a hazard aspect, or even some of the threat aspect, knowing that you have that capability to track down and trace down if they are going to do something moving forward.
Well, you anticipated my interest in moving to some of the homeland questions, but since you just mentioned the allies there, I want to weave in a question from Paul Enderle from Lockheed Missiles and Fire Control. He's asking about especially the NATO cooperation. He mentions the high visibility project for ground-based air defense. and wants to know, how is DoD's approach going to be integrated and aligned with NATO or individual NATO countries in the future?
Great question, Paul, and I know Paul Enderley very well. I already highlighted earlier from a counter-UAS perspective, NATO had decided that they were going to get after the counter-UAS problem set together as NATO, and we're plugged in to that effort from the JCO aspect to see how we can help influence or be part of that process with NATO. And I also fully understand his comment of what they're doing in Europe to try to get after this problem set from counter-UAS all the way through hypersonic, and how do we integrate a common air picture to get after that. And so we're plugged in to all those efforts, and we're moving forward. We don't have as much control when you're talking NATO organization. We input to it, and we try to help shape and align. But I think the way we do that is by continuing to engage them and show them what we're doing and how we're moving forward with, and like I highlighted when Nicole and her team did that, there was a lot of immediate interest on what we're doing and how we're moving forward, and by us sharing that and moving forward with that together, I think is the best way to move forward. Because at the end of the day, if you produce something that's good and it works, people are going to come and want to try to leverage that, and that's what we're trying to do, working with the industry and the services out there to develop something that works and that our NATO allies feel confident in, and then want to bring it on as part of their program moving forward.
Great, thank you. I'll just want to say real quick, we have a ton of questions coming in. I'm doing my best to sort through them. We have 45 or something. But let me take one more question before we move to some of the homeland issues. This is from Bill Darnay at Raytheon, and he's asking the budget question. Given flattening budgets, and maybe even force structure cuts, how do we see, and what's the prospect for these interesting counter-UAS capabilities actually transitioning to programs of record and being solidified?
Well, I'm going to keep pushing based off of the budget line that we laid out in the new program starts that we laid out moving forward, and won't be able to control what happens. The department will make prioritization decisions, and I'll move out based off of the decisions that are made moving forward. But I think we have a pretty good initial plan for the new capability, working with the services to get there. And we're going to continue to drive down that lane, kind of what I highlighted earlier of, services that are aligned to certain technologies, and leveraging our ranges to be able to deliver that capability moving forward. And that's the best we can do at this point.
That also goes back to the risk-based approach, being smart about the kind of countermeasures you need at different facilities, so that you have the appropriate scale and scope of the type of things that you need for one installation versus another.
Great, thank you. So let me transition now to some of the homeland and more civ-mil aspects of this problem set. Yushi Matsuyama, who is a visiting fellow in the Japan chair here at CSIS. Yushi asks, given that DOJ and DHS, which you mentioned, are also working on drone countermeasures, can you speak to the collaboration with those departments?
So we're meeting regularly with them, particularly our requirements and capabilities division. So we're trying to find ways, as we talked about several times in the document, about trying to be interoperable with those other organizations, because we need to, each of the different agencies has different sets of authorities, and so we need to be able to work together.
Great. Let me pick up on another aspect of this. The document, I was struck by the relative attention, of course, to the unique challenges of operating in the homeland for these problems, and it's interesting the attention to the hazard part of the small UAS rather than just the threat. And so, what is it about the threat that makes that important to highlight, and talk to us a little bit about how the department's going to need to work with the FAA and other civilian authorities. At the end of the day, the military is going to have to be able to shoot down a threat to a sensitive facility, even in the homeland. So talk to us a little bit about that.
Okay, so CENTCOM is not the only theater where we see small UAS. We see them in, all across all three operating environments, and so the ROE is different in all three of those areas. Oftentimes, drones are also talked about as, like the IED, the new IED. There are similarities, but the biggest difference is that there was never a good use for the IED. There are legitimate uses for drones, and so we need to understand how to distinguish between, legitimate users and nefarious actors. A drone in and of itself is not a threat, and so you have to assess, determine what the threat is, the capability and the intent. And so if a recreational user is using a drone and they accidentally move into protected airspace, it's not necessarily a threat. It's a hazard to an ongoing mission potentially, but it's not a threat. And so, how you mitigate that situation is going to vary. So it's important that we don't look at every single small UAS that flies around, particularly in the homeland, as a threat. We really need to have a better understanding of the intent.
And on that point, the document talks about the need for the DoD it says, adopt a posture of anomaly detection, and the need to highlight abnormal behavior. That's tied up with FAA in terms of who owns the airspace. So how would you characterize the progress that's been made, both in terms of your working with FAA, but how that's going to be hammered out so that, again, we can have the no-kidding protection of military bases within the homeland?
So I think the first step would be the remote ID. When that finally comes online, that'll be a good way to distinguish. So if you have a drone, you're supposed to have it registered. And so instead of looking at a screen full of drones, you're not sure which is a nefarious actor and which is a legitimate actor, if you're registered, then you can kind of disregard those. So now the things that you're looking at are now much more narrow, and so that will help.
Great.
And Tom, just to highlight that to that point, in accordance with our authorities, within the Title 10 130I, the department OSD policy specifically, and I know Bob Slate's my counterpart, has done a lot of great work with the FAA on getting authority. So we don't want to paint the impression that there's that the FAA's handcuffing us. The FAA, we have several systems out there right now that are providing counter UAS capability. It's obviously, it's how do we time the on-ramp of technology with the authorities in a timely manner, and we have a seat within the FAA from a DoD perspective, to where we have those forums where we can work through these issues and work through how do we bring on that capability so that FAA is comfortable with the freedom of navigation piece, and we're comfortable with having the ability to protect our installations with the right capability.
Great. Well, let me take a question from Melissa Hirsch. She's a strategy and risk consultant, and she asked something that I think General Gainey, you referenced earlier. How is the JCO collecting, standardizing, and sharing small UAS and counter UAS use cases to update and inform requirements? And she mentions Ukraine, but also the Armenia and Azerbaijan conflict, which of course had some pretty interesting events there. You mentioned the library. Could you speak to how that's again being collected and worked into the library?
Yeah, the library effort that we have and that we're working with I2WD essentially is that central repository that they're pulling in, all the threat data into one common database, and have already set up a way to ensure that each service is able to pull that data out of a central repository. And we highlighted that early through our assessment, that we had several, different databases amongst the services that they're all pulling from. So you didn't have that single picture. And so now we've done that, and all the services agreed that this was the right thing to do moving forward, and all of them were excited about it. And so we've already started that effort, funded that effort, and they're moving forward with that effort to where we have that repository.
Great. All right, so we're close to time here. I want to just first ask, what are the next steps? You've got the strategy out; it's been signed out, but what are the next steps to making this a reality?
So we are in actually the final stages of the final staffing of the implementation plan. So that should be released at the end of this month. And so those are all the action plans of things that we're going to do to make the strategy a reality.
And Tom, what I would highlight it is that as far as next up, we're moving forward. So as the strategy was released, the organization had already been moving forward and decisions made. So, April, you will see the first common test range testing event with industry, where RICTO in the Air Force will bring in we're going out to industry. They're going to release a message out to industry, 15 January, saying bring all your low collateral effectors to the range first week of April, and we'll select the best ones and move forward with that as the joint solution. So the process is now moving forward, and then it'll just, all these other efforts we discussed, then you'll just start seeing the results of these efforts moving over the next few months moving forward.
Great. Well, look, this has been a rich discussion, but I want to end on something a little bit fun. Threats, sometimes it's helpful as they get into the popular imagination. Pop culture plays a role here. So I want to ask you both kind of what are some shows or maybe a movie that is your favorite to kind of depict the current and future small UAS threat?
I would say two things. One, Angel Has Fallen, the opening scene of that is terrifying. And also there's an episode in Black Mirror, maybe last season ago, where they're like tiny drones that maybe the size of a bee that uses facial recognition. So that's also very frightening, but interesting. So I recommend those two things.
Okay.
Yeah, and Nicole stole my thunder on the Angel Has Fallen, because when I first watched that, it was when I was first assigned as the director of JCO, and my son and daughter looked at me and said, "You got that?" and as we all know, with the several problem sets involved in that scenario, essentially creates the challenge that we're faced and that we're moving forward. But what I will tell you is, with the work that the services have done and are doing right now in support of this effort, the great teamwork with the services and my organization, and the great teamwork with industry and excitement from the industry to be part of this and to continue to move forward in developing capability. The excitement is out there, and I've had the opportunity to speak to about anybody that wants to be part of this space, because I always tell my team, if they want to talk to me about it and they have something to contribute, I want to talk to them, because I want to hear from them, because this is a complex problem and it's going to take a enterprise approach to be able to get after this problem. And I just really appreciate everybody who's reached out to the JCO, all the services, for being such great team players in this process, and everybody within the JCO organization that are, you see Nicole here today and the great work they've done with the strategy, but there's several members on the team doing requirements, operations, acquisition. It's just a great team built rapidly and quickly that's getting after this complex problem. And I appreciate this opportunity, Tom, that you've provided, and this platform that you've provided. Like I said, it's always great being on a panel with you or being at one of these events with you. You're a good friend and a good advocate for what we do, and I'd like to thank you for that.
Well, thank you, sir. Thank you, Nicole, and really appreciate your taking the time to roll it out. And I'm sure that you can tell your kids you've got it in good hands. So thanks again, and thanks to everybody for tuning in. Apologies if we didn't get to your questions. We had just an enormous number, but thanks, and we'll stay tuned for the future. So have a good day.
Bye.